Hello and welcome to the UAAA and Griffin podcast. We are Kevin, Christian, Griffin, and Tyler. Okay, so now we will discuss how the rise of these businesses influenced massive migrations, urbanization, and efforts to reshape the economy and environment. The development of large-scale production, along with massive technological advancements and the government's policy of laissez-faire capitalism. The laissez-faire policy opposed any government intervention in the economy. So for a while, corporations could do whatever they wanted.
What role did the rise of big business play in urbanization?
In this period, we see many technological advancements made such as the transatlantic cable, electric power, and telephone. Along with those, we see the increased usage of steel with the economic and architectural benefits it brought. Big businesses capitalized on this, especially Andrew Carnegie's Steel Corporation, which led the expansion of the American steel industry. Carnegie Steel dominated the American steel industry, eventually forming a vertical monopoly where the corporation obtained control over every step involved in the steel production, from collecting raw materials, the steel production itself, and distribution. Steel-framed buildings became a new thing where steel was being used as the building's foundation due to the strength of the material. The first one we see was the home insurance company building in Chicago. The building was made possible by a steel skeleton and a central steam heating system. Steel would continue to help expand cities with these buildings. These cities eventually became the new location of farmers who moved away from the agricultural life and into the industrial life. People who lived in streetcar cities often lived many miles away from their jobs and commuted to work by horse carriages or trolleys.
However, these cities and buildings did not benefit everyone. Those who were poor still struggled living there. There were certain buildings who were left by the rich near the business districts. These buildings were divided into small, crowded, windowless apartments for the poor. Slums and tenements could cram over 4,000 people in a single city block. When New York City passed a law requiring each bedroom a window, the landlords responded with dumbbell tenements, with the center of the building a window. These tenements in poverty left the poor of these cities with issues on how to deal with living conditions of the poor. Urban reformers were those who sought to improve the standards of living for the poor through means of education, health, economic, and sanitary means through settlement homes. These houses were organizations that provided support service to the poor and European immigrants in cities and other densely populated areas. More and more cities grew in population and became more dense. The census of 1890 demonstrated the dramatic increase in American population to be over 25% from 1880. It stated that the population increased from a little over 50 million to about 63 million.
How did big business affect migration during the Gilded Age?
Migration worked hand in hand with the urbanization of America. Eventually, the role of these cities became more defined. Cities served as a place for immigrants and others to find work. As cities developed, immigrants migrated to areas within their cities that were populated by people of similar ethnic background. These areas were called ethnic neighborhoods, and today we can see those in places like Chinatown, which can be found in many major cities across the country. In addition to ethnic neighborhoods, we also see the rise of the residential suburb. By 1900, suburbs developed around every major American city. The development of the streetcar allowed people to migrate out of the crowded, unsafe cities into these new residential areas. Thus, the United States became the world's first suburban nation. But cities and suburban areas weren't the only places that people flocked to. The frontier, the unsettled land out west, also attracted people, with government policies like the Homestead Act encouraging settlement. Historian Frederick Jackson Turner, who wrote The Significance of the Frontier in American History, believed that the availability of unsettled land in this time period and throughout the rest of American history was the most important thing in terms of national development. Basically, migrants flocked to cities, suburbs, and the frontier to pursue their own economic interests.
Speaking of economic interests, how did big business spark governmental and popular efforts to reshape the economy and environment?
While the government was mostly laissez-faire during the Gilded Age, this began to change as time went on. Initially, all the government did was issue tariffs, taxes that would be paid on imported goods, which would in theory help American businesses. The high tariffs were designed to encourage rapid industrialization and protect the high American wage rates. As big businesses became increasingly monopolistic and exploitative. The government issued the Sherman Antitrust Act, which would allow the government to break up trusts or groups of corporations working together to increase profit that interfered with trade and reduced economic competition. However, sometimes the use of the Antitrust Act would be overridden, as was the case in U.S. v. E.C. Knight, in which the Supreme Court ruled that the Knight Company's monopoly over the production of sugar had no direct effect on commerce, so the Sherman Antitrust Act could not be used to deal with the monopoly. The court also ruled that manufacturing and mining were not affected by interstate commerce and thus beyond the regulatory powers of Congress.
When in terms of popular movements, there were many reasons why workers were discontent with their management. Poor wages, poor working conditions, and long working hours for little pay were among those reasons. The Iron Law of Wages, created by David Ricardo, was used by many corporations, and said that because of the pressure of population growth, wages would be just high enough to keep workers from starving. Because of these unjust conditions, workers eventually unionized. Major organizations we see during the Gilded Age are the Knights of Labor, the largest labor organization in the 19th century, and the American Federation of Labor. The Knights of Labor was the more radical of the two, supporting measures like the restriction of child labor, a graduated income tax, the abolition of contract labor, and monetary reform. They were also more politically active. The American Federation of Labor was the other major organization and was much more conservative. Formed by Samuel Gompers, the AFL relied on workers bargaining with their employers for better working conditions. Employers saw these organizations and unions in general as threats, so they used many anti-union tactics to try and discourage their workers from unionizing. These included yellow dog contracts, where workers had to sign an agreement to not join a union if employed. Blacklists, where many of pro-union workers were circulated among many employers so that they would not be employed, and the usage of private guards like the Pinkertons to put down strikes. The first major strike was the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, occurring after wages were cut. Strikers were depicted as violent and communist by the media, and the strike was broken up by federal troops sent in by President Rutherford B. Hayes.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the UAAA and Griffin podcast. We are Kevin, Christian, Griffin, and Tyler. Thank you.